My name is Claire Thompson, and for most of my 20s, I felt invisible in the very place that should have been my safest haven, my own family table. While my cousins bragged about corner offices and six-figure bonuses, I poured my heart into a small community impact project that barely paid the rent but filled my days with purpose. To them, it wasn't a real job, just a hobby dressed up as work. Every Thanksgiving, their teasing grew sharper, their laughter a little louder, until I learned how to smile through the stink. What they didn't know, what even I couldn't have predicted, was that the city itself was watching. And on one unforgettable holiday, the door would open, the mayor would walk in, and the very job they mocked would become the reason everyone at that table fell silent. The night began like every other Thanksgiving, with the smell of roasted turkey drifting through my parents' doorway and the soft glow of porch lights bouncing off the damp November pavement. I balanced a pumpkin pie in my hands as I stepped inside, smiling as cousins called out greetings and uncles reached for coats, yet a knot already tightened in my stomach. Each year I told myself it would be different, that this time they might see me for more than a job title they barely understood. But the familiar sound of overlapping success stories filled the dining room before I even set down the dessert. My cousin Mark bragged about a new promotion and a company car. Aunt Linda laughed about a stock portfolio that practically feeds itself. I slid into my chair, tucking stray hair behind my ear, determined to be gracious, even as their words brushed against the raw places I kept hidden. Someone asked how my little project was going, the phrase curling like smoke in the air, and I offered a polite update about the community programs I managed for the city. After-school tutoring, neighborhood cleanups, the kind of work that never makes headlines but changes lives quietly. An uncle chuckled, asking if hugs were part of my paycheck, and the table erupted with good-natured laughter that felt anything but good. I forced a smile, my fork trembling slightly as I speared a slice of sweet potato, while inside my chest, the ache of being misunderstood grew heavier. As plates were passed and wine glasses refilled, I stole glances at the people who had raised me, wondering how love and judgment could share the same space so easily. My mother, ever gentle with her barbs, offered a soft comment that cut the deepest. "At least your hobby keeps you busy." She said it with a smile that might have fooled anyone else, but the words landed like a blade wrapped in silk. For a heartbeat, I considered defending the late nights spent writing grants, the weekends coordinating volunteers, the quiet triumph of watching children discover they mattered. But I swallowed the urge along with the sip of lukewarm cider. Around me, the conversation swelled back to bonuses and holiday bonuses, but the sound blurred, replaced by the steady beat of my own resolve. I excused myself to the kitchen, gripping the cool countertop as the house hummed behind me, and stared at my reflection in the dark window. In that quiet space, away from the noise and expectations, something inside me shifted. I no longer craved their approval. I craved results that would speak for themselves. I promised that by next Thanksgiving, I would walk back through this same doorway with proof that purpose outranks prestige. None of us knew that the city's mayor was already watching the work they dismissed, or that a year from now, a knock at this very door would silence every doubt with a single unexpected arrival. The weeks after that Thanksgiving passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights, each one feeding the quiet determination that had taken root in my chest. I returned to my tiny office above the community center, a space that smelled faintly of old books and coffee grounds, and threw myself into the work everyone else called a hobby. The winter air outside was sharp enough to sting, but inside our little headquarters, the energy of possibility kept me warm. While my family compared investment returns, I was writing grant proposals under flickering fluorescent lights, stretching small budgets into programs that gave kids a safe place to land after school. I organized food drives, brokered partnerships with local shop owners, and learned how to stretch a single donation into a week's worth of meals. There were nights when I left long after the city buses stopped running, walking home beneath streetlights that buzzed like quiet applause. My friends from college were chasing promotions and planning vacations. I was chasing something less tangible, something that smelled of fresh paint on a playground fence and sounded like a child's laughter echoing down an alley once ruled by silence. It wasn't glamorous. My coat sleeves frayed, my shoes wore thin, and I learned to survive on oatmeal and determination. But each small victory, a scholarship for a teen who once believed no one cared, a grant that kept the center's lights on another month, felt like proof that I was building something real. Still, there were moments of doubt. On the loneliest nights, I would replay my mother's words, wondering if I had chosen a path too quiet for anyone to notice. Yet every time the thought threatened to settle, some sign arrived to push me forward. A handwritten thank you note from a grandmother whose grandson found refuge in our after-school program. A shy hug from a child who now read chapter books with ease. A neighborhood mural splashed in colors so bright they seemed to defy the gray winter sky. Those moments whispered a truth my family couldn't hear, that meaning doesn't always shout from a corner office. As spring unfolded, our efforts began to attract attention beyond the block. A local journalist stopped by for a quick story. A city council member toured our classrooms and left with moist eyes. I didn't tell my parents about the small articles or the increasing calls from City Hall. Not yet. I wanted the results to speak for themselves, to build quietly until the evidence became undeniable. Each night, as I locked the center's door and felt the cool key turn in the metal, I imagined the next Thanksgiving and the look on my family's faces when they finally understood. They thought my job was a side note in life's grand story, but the opening chapters of something bigger were already being written, line by line, in the very city they believed wasn't watching at all. By summer, the city's heat clung to every sidewalk like a second skin, and my projects were blooming as fiercely as the wildflowers pushing through the cracks. But back at home, the chill of quiet judgment lingered. Family group chats filled with photos of beach vacations and business conferences, while my updates about community murals or new tutoring programs earned polite thumbs-up emojis and little else. When I visited for Sunday dinners, the questions were always the same. Soft on the surface, sharp underneath. "Are you still doing that little city thing?" an aunt would ask, her smile stretched too thin to be casual. "Do you think you'll get a real position soon?" My mother would refill my plate as if food could soften the sting. I learned to nod, to let their words pass through me like background noise. But every careless comment left a small bruise that only deepened when I returned to my tiny apartment. Alone, I sometimes sat on the edge of my bed and let the tears fall, quiet enough that even the neighbors couldn't hear. I told myself that resilience meant swallowing the hurt, yet each tear carried a secret hope that someday they would understand why I chose this path. At the community center, their skepticism became fuel. I worked longer hours, organized weekend cleanups that turned trash-strewn lots into gardens, and watched with quiet pride as neighborhood kids began calling me Miss Claire, with voices full of trust. Still, late at night, when the city finally exhaled and the streets went silent, I couldn't help but wonder if my efforts would ever speak loud enough to drown out the laughter from that Thanksgiving table. The invitation from the mayor's office became the spark that turned quiet determination into a relentless fire. From the moment I read that email, every hour carried a new urgency. I began drafting proposals late into the night, my desk buried beneath color-coded charts, photos of smiling volunteers, and handwritten notes from children whose lives our programs had already touched. Meetings with the mayor's staff soon followed. First, a brief coffee, then a formal presentation in a sunlit conference room overlooking the city skyline. I wore the same blazer to every meeting, carefully pressed though its cuffs were beginning to fray, because I wanted my ideas, not my wardrobe, to shine. Their questions were sharp but encouraging, and each nod of approval fueled a quiet thrill that no one at my family's dinner table could have imagined. Back at the community center, the stakes felt higher than ever. We doubled the number of tutoring sessions, launched a weekend food pantry, and organized neighborhood safety walks that brought parents and local shopkeepers together for the first time. I learned to stretch every donation, to write grant proposals with precision, to navigate city bureaucracy without losing heart. My phone buzzed constantly with updates, new volunteers signing up, journalists requesting interviews, city officials asking for progress reports. Yet, even in the swirl of growing attention, there were moments of solitary struggle. I spent long nights sealing envelopes and adjusting budgets, fighting back waves of exhaustion while the rest of the world slept. When the pressure threatened to overwhelm me, I thought of the children who now walked home with backpacks full of books instead of fear, and of the quiet kitchen where I once stood gripping the counter in humiliation. Their faces steadied my hands. By early autumn, the mayor's office approved a pilot partnership that would bring our model to 3 additional neighborhoods. It wasn't just recognition, it was a lifeline for communities long overlooked. Standing on the roof of the center one crisp evening, I watched the city lights flicker like a constellation of second chances and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost knocked me to my knees. I didn't tell my family about the pilot program. Not yet. I wanted the proof to arrive fully formed, undeniable, something even the sharpest Thanksgiving comments couldn't pierce. As I locked up the sensor that night, the keys cool in my palm, I whispered a promise to the empty hallway. This year, I'll walk back into that house carrying more than dessert. I'll bring a story too big for anyone to dismiss. Autumn arrived, wrapped in the scent of rain-soaked leaves and possibility. I was at my desk sorting flyers for an upcoming fundraiser when an unfamiliar number flashed across my phone. Expecting another volunteer inquiry, I answered casually, but the voice on the other end carried a weight that stilled the room. It was the mayor's personal assistant, inviting me to a private recognition dinner the night before Thanksgiving. The mayor himself wanted to thank me, and she added, almost as an afterthought, he intended to make a surprise visit to one of our programs the next evening. For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. The hum of the community center suddenly distant, as if the world had tilted and left me suspended. After months of quiet labor, of late-night grant writing and weekend cleanups, the city's highest office was not only watching, but choosing to step directly into our story. When I finally hung up, I pressed the phone to my chest and let a smile break across my face, a rare, unguarded joy. That night, while the city buzzed beneath the crisp November moon, I lay awake replaying the conversation and imagining my family's expressions if they knew. But I kept the news close, savoring it like a secret melody. Over the next few days, preparations consumed me. I coordinated with the mayor's staff to ensure the visit would showcase the children's artwork, the newly planted gardens, and the small miracles that had grown from our once tiny budget. Volunteers strung twinkling lights along the hallway while I double-checked schedules, hiding my excitement behind a calm professionalism. At home, I spoke to my parents on the phone and listened as they planned the usual Thanksgiving menu, my mother debating pies, my uncle boasting about his company's year-end bonus, while I offered vague replies and guarded the details of what was coming. Their words no longer wounded me. Instead, they rolled off like rain on a waxed leash. I had something bigger than their approval now. On the morning of the dinner, I stood before my small mirror, fastening the same worn blazer that had accompanied me to every pivotal meeting. I thought of the first Thanksgiving when I promised myself I'd return with proof and felt the promise solidify beneath my fingertips. As the driver sent by the city hall pulled up outside the community center, I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, steady heart, a woman finally stepping into her own narrative. The mayor's visit was no longer a distant possibility. It was a date marked on the city's calendar, a truth waiting to unfold at the very table where my worth had once been questioned. Tomorrow, while my family passed plates and traded promotions, a door would open that none of them could have predicted, carrying with it the recognition I had earned in silence and the validation I no longer needed, but deeply deserved. Thanksgiving evening arrived wrapped in the scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey, the kind of cozy atmosphere that once tightened like a noose around my chest. This year, though, I carried a quiet power beneath my winter coat as I walked up the familiar stone steps of my parents' house. The mayor's dinner had taken place the night before, a dazzling blur of warm speeches and heartfelt congratulations that I had barely begun to process. He had thanked me personally for my dedication to the city's youth and hinted that his visit tonight will be the highlights of his holiday. Only a handful of staffers knew which home he would enter, and I had kept my own family blissfully unaware. When my mother opened the door, her face brightened with the same welcoming smile she had offered every year, but I caught the quick flicker of curiosity when she noticed the calm steadiness in my eyes. Inside, the house glowed with golden light. Cousins laughed near the fireplace, their conversations already brimming with stories of year-end bonuses and new real estate deals. I set my dessert on the sideboard and joined the circle of chatter, listening as they compared office politics and overseas vacations. A year ago, their voices would have felt like knives. Tonight, they were only background music to the promise beating steadily in my chest. Dinner unfolded with familiar rhythms. Plates passed, glasses refilled, jokes shared with practiced ease. My uncle asked again about my little community job, his tone half curious, half dismissive. I answered calmly, offering simple updates about our expanded programs without revealing the magnitude of the mayor's support. The table buzzed with casual indifference, exactly as I had expected. When my mother offered another soft barb, "Well, at least you keep him busy, dear," I felt no sting, only a quiet anticipation that warmed me from within. The evening stretched on, conversation rising and falling like waves against a shore I no longer feared. Then, just as dessert plates clinked against the table and the first notes of a holiday playlist filled the room, a firm knock echoed through the hallway. Conversation paused. My father frowned, glancing toward the door. No one in our family ever arrived unannounced on Thanksgiving night. He opened it to reveal a man in a tailored coat, flanked by two staff members, his presence commanding and unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the dining room as the mayor of our city stepped into the warm glow, carrying a small box wrapped in the city's blue and gold ribbon. "Good evening," he said, his voice resonant yet kind. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I came to personally thank Claire Thompson for her extraordinary work in our neighborhoods." The room went silent, except for the soft hiss of the fireplace. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. I rose slowly, heart hammering, but smile steady as the mayor crossed the room and shook my hand with a sincerity that left no space for doubt. He spoke of the programs we had built, the children whose futures had brightened, and the pilot partnership that would soon expand across the city. Cameras flashed as a staff member recorded the moment for the official channels. My cousin stared, mouth slightly open. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass until her knuckles whitened. The mayor presented me with a polished city service badge, my new title etched in silver, and thanked my family for raising a citizen who refuses to accept the limits of expectation. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then swelling until the walls themselves seemed to hum. I caught my mother's gaze across the table, her eyes glistening with a complex mix of pride, surprise, and the faint shadow of regret. In that instant, every late night, every whispered doubt, every quiet tear felt redeemed. As the mayor departed, promising future visits and a formal press conference, the room remained suspended in the silence thicker than any argument. I returned to my seat, the badge warm in my hand, and finally allowed myself a slow breath. The laughter that followed was different this time, softer, humbler, edged with the respect that no one dared to name. Thanksgiving had begun like every other, but it was ending with the truth my family could no longer ignore. The job they mocked had become the city's pride, and the daughter they underestimated had brought the mayor to their door. The morning after Thanksgiving dawned with a soft winter light that spilled across my bedroom like a quiet blessing. I woke to the faint hum of my phone vibrating on the nightstand, messages piling up from friends, volunteers, and colleagues who had already seen the short video the mayor's staff posted to the city's social channels. Clips of his surprise visit were everywhere. The handshake, the badge glinting beneath the chandelier, the stunned faces of my relatives caught mid-breath. Overnight, what had once been a modest neighborhood project had become a headline. My inbox overflowed with invitations from local radio stations, nonprofit leaders, and even a regional news network requesting interviews. As I scrolled through the flood of congratulations, I felt both exhilaration and an almost surreal calm. The recognition I once thought I needed now arrived as a byproduct of the work itself, a confirmation, not the goal. Later that morning, the mayor called personally to thank me again. His voice carried the same warmth I had heard in my parents' dining room, as he explained that our partnership would receive an emergency grant to expand citywide within the coming year. "Claire," he said, "you've shown us what one determined citizen can accomplish. We need leaders like you to shape the next chapter of this city." I listened, humbled but steady, thinking of every late night and every quiet moment of doubt that had led to this point. When he invited me to speak at a press conference the following week, I agreed with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The days that followed unfolded in a swirl of cameras, meetings, and careful planning. At the community center, children ran up to hug me, their small arms carrying a joy that outshone any news headline. Volunteers grinned with a new pride, knowing that their hours of unseen labor were finally visible to the wider world. Journalists toured our classrooms and gardens, snapping photos of murals painted by young hands, capturing the transformation of once forgotten corners of the city. Each interaction reminded me that the mayor's words were not simply political praise. They were an acknowledgement of the people whose lives had changed alongside my own. Back at home, my family struggled to process the sudden shift. My mother called late one evening, her voice soft in a way I hadn't heard since childhood. She admitted that she had underestimated the scope of my work and apologized for the dismissive comments that had once sliced so deep. "I'm proud of you, Claire," she said, her words hesitant but sincere. I felt no need to revisit old wounds. Instead, I thanked her and allowed a long silence to carry the forgiveness neither of us needed to articulate. My cousin sent tentative text messages filled with emojis and awkward congratulations, each one a small bridge across the chasm of past judgment. When the day of the press conference arrived, I stood on the steps of City Hall beneath a crisp blue sky, the mayor beside me, and a sea of cameras reflecting the morning sun. As I spoke about the power of small acts and the importance of community, I thought of that first Thanksgiving vow whispered in my parents' kitchen, a promise born of humiliation and transformed into purpose. The mayor's words of praise followed mine, echoing across the plaza and into the hearts of everyone who once doubted that quiet work could spark citywide change. Watching my family in the crowd, faces lit with pride they no longer tried to hide, I realized that the real victory wasn't the badge or the headlines. It was the freedom of knowing that my worth had never depended on their recognition and the quiet satisfaction of seeing them finally understand. Winter settled over the city with a hush, but inside the community center, the air buzzed with the warmth I could almost touch. Only a few months had passed since the mayor's visit, yet the world around me felt completely different. Streets once dim and cracked now bloomed with murals and gardens. Classrooms echoed with laughter, and strangers who once hurried past one another now stopped to talk and share ideas. One crisp Saturday morning, I arrived early to set up for our year-end celebration and paused at the threshold, overwhelmed by the sight of neighbors decorating tables, volunteers arranging food, and children stringing paper stars across the windows. It struck me how far we had come from that first hesitant meeting in a drafty church basement, when all I had was a sketchbook of plans and a stubborn belief that small actions could spark something bigger. As the room filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner that had once left me feeling invisible and the badge that had changed the trajectory of my life. My parents entered quietly, my mother carrying a tray of cookies and my father holding a stack of folding chairs. They looked around, their eyes wide, as they took in the colorful banners and bustling energy. And for the first time, I saw not skepticism or pity, but open admiration. My father clasped my shoulder and said simply, "This is incredible, Claire. You built all this." His voice cracked on the last word, and I felt a quiet release in my chest, a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying finally slipping away. Throughout the afternoon, the center filled with music and laughter as families shared stories of how the programs had helped them. A teenage boy who now dreamed of becoming a civil engineer after building our first community garden. A single mother who found a safe after-school space for her daughter. An elderly couple who discovered new friendships in weekly art classes. Each story was a living testament to the belief that had driven me from the beginning, that no one is truly useless when given a chance to contribute. During a short speech, I thanked the volunteers and donors who had kept the dream alive, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I caught my mother's gaze across the room and saw her wiping away a tear, her earlier judgment replaced with a deep, undeniable pride. My cousins stood nearby, clapping and smiling, their past mockery dissolved into something gentler and more meaningful. As the evening sun dipped below the skyline, painting the windows in streaks of gold and rose, the mayor arrived once more, this time without cameras or a prepared speech. He shook my hand and whispered, "This is what leadership looks like." His words were quiet enough that only I could hear them, but they echoed through me like a promise. After he left, I wandered outside to the small garden we had built that first spring. Snow had begun to fall, delicate flakes settling on the dormant soil, and I stood there breathing in the cold air, thinking of the girl who once sat at a Thanksgiving table feeling worthless and unseen. I realized that true validation had never come from the mayor's praise or the sudden attention. It had grown steadily, quietly, through every early morning, every late night, and every life touched by this project. My family's newfound respect felt sweet, but it was no longer the fuel that kept me moving. What mattered now was the work itself, the community that had become my extended family, and the knowledge that I had turned a moment of humiliation into a lifelong mission. As I locked the center for the night and stepped into the soft glow of the streetlights, I felt a profound sense of peace. The circle was complete, not because everyone finally saw my worth, but because I had never stopped believing in it myself. The new year arrived with a sharp January wind and a sky so clear it felt like anything was possible. As I walked through the city that morning, past murals painted by neighborhood kids and benches built by local carpenters, I felt the quiet hum of a life finally aligned with its purpose. Only a year earlier, I had sat at my parents' Thanksgiving table, swallowing their barbed jokes, wondering if my work would ever matter. Now the same streets that once felt indifferent seemed alive with proof of what persistence could build. Flyers announcing new literacy classes fluttered on community boards, small businesses offered discounts to center volunteers, and families strolled through parks that had once been abandoned lots. Every sign of growth felt like a small heartbeat, a reminder that the vision I once defended alone had become a shared dream. Opportunities began arriving faster than I could have imagined. An email from a national nonprofit invited me to join a fellowship for young civic leaders, offering resources to expand our programs beyond the city. A university professor requested that I speak to graduate students about grassroots leadership, promising a modest honorarium that felt unnecessary but strangely validating. Local businesses began to donate equipment and supplies without being asked, their owners eager to invest in a project that now symbolized hope for the entire community. Every sign of growth felt like a small heartbeat, a reminder that the vision I once defended alone had become a shared dream. My family, once my harshest critics, became unlikely allies in this next chapter. My father offered to help with bookkeeping, his years of accounting experience suddenly a gift I hadn't known I needed. My mother, whose skepticism once cut deepest, volunteered to lead a new cooking class for teens, teaching them the same family recipes she used to prepare for Thanksgiving dinners. Watching her laugh with the students, I felt an almost dizzying mixture of love and irony. This was the same woman who once questioned whether my little side project was worth my time. Now she wore our volunteer badge proudly, greeting guests with a warmth that surprised even her. My cousins began showing up too, not out of obligation, but genuine curiosity, eager to participate in the growing movement they had once mocked. Their presence reminded me that redemption often arrives not in grand apologies, but in quiet, consistent acts of support. Despite the success, I faced new challenges that tested my resolve. Scaling the program meant hiring staff, negotiating budgets, and making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Late nights at my desk brought familiar doubts. Was I capable of leading on the larger stage? Could I protect the mission from being diluted by politics or funding pressures? During those moments of uncertainty, I returned to the garden outside the center, its winter soil sleeping beneath a crust of frost. There, among the silent beds where spring vegetables would soon grow, I reminded myself why I had begun. The goal was never fame or validation. It was to create a space where people could belong, learn, and believe in their own worth. That clarity steadied me like a lighthouse in a storm. By spring, we hosted our first citywide conference on community resilience. Representatives from neighboring towns filled the center, taking notes, asking questions, and planning to replicate our model. As I delivered the keynote address, I spotted my parents in the front row, their eyes bright with pride they no longer tried to hide. Behind them, volunteers I had once recruited one by one now stood shoulder to shoulder, a living testament to the power of persistence. When the audience rose in a standing ovation, I felt the weight of every past slight and every late-night worry dissolve into a single luminous truth. The life I had built was not a reaction to their doubt, but a fulfillment of my own vision. That night, after the conference ended and the guests had gone, I lingered in the quiet hall, the echo of applause still hanging in the air. I thought back to that first Thanksgiving when I had walked away from the table humiliated, yet determined. If I could speak to that version of myself now, I would tell her this: their laughter was never the final word. The final word belonged to the steady work, the countless small victories, and the unshakable belief that worth is something you claim, not something you wait to be given. As I locked the doors and stepped into the cool night, the city lights shimmered like a promise. My story was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about leading a future I had chosen for myself and inviting others to do the same.